When love turns into guilt. Did you feel guilty just for wanting something your mother didn't want? It seems like such a simple question, yet it carries the weight of a childhood spent walking on emotional eggshells. If your mother was always sick, always tired, always overwhelmed or misunderstood by the world, this video is for you, because sometimes love doesn't come as warmth and security. Sometimes it comes with a price: your silence, your compliance, your emotional self-sacrifice. Virginia Satir once said, "We must not allow the wounds of the past to dictate who we become." But how do you recognize a wound that was disguised as love? Let's talk about a mother who is not outwardly abusive, but whose suffering becomes the center of the home. A mother who cries easily, who is always the victim of someone or something. She might say, "No one ever cares about me. I gave up everything for you. If something happens to me, remember it's because I worry too much about you." And so, without even realizing it, you start shrinking. You suppress your voice. You postpone your desires. You become a version of yourself that tiptoes around her pain, trying not to be too much. Because in this emotional landscape, just having your own needs feels like betrayal. The invisible contract children are deeply loyal, especially to a parent who seems to be always hurting. So they sign an invisible contract. "I'll take care of you, Mom, emotionally, even if I'm just a child." At first, it seems harmless. You help her calm down when she's upset. You feel proud when she calls you mature or says you're her little angel. But slowly, something shifts. You stop asking for things. You feel guilty for having fun when she's sad. You question your instincts, your dreams, even your joy. Because every time you choose yourself, she makes you feel like you're choosing against her. And that's the core of this wound. Love gets entangled with guilt. What guilt really means in this context. Let's pause here, because guilt is not just a feeling. It's a sign of emotional confusion. You weren't born selfish. You weren't wrong for wanting to play, to rest, to say no, or to go out with friends. But when you were made to feel that your autonomy caused pain, your brain created a dangerous equation. If I'm happy, Mom is hurt. If I'm independent, I'm ungrateful. If I live my life, I'm abandoning her. So you began to perform, to overthink every decision, to stay close, even when your soul wanted distance. You began to equate loyalty with emotional servitude, the mask of the suffering mother. Let's be clear, not all mothers who suffer do this. There's a difference between someone going through hard times and someone using suffering as a tool to control. The victim mother doesn't just share her pain, she anchors you to it. Her sadness becomes the weather of your household. Her tears can cancel your joy. Her sickness can sabotage your plans. She might never say it directly, but the message is loud and clear. You owe me your happiness because I gave you life. And that is not love. That's emotional debt. That's the beginning of a dynamic that turns love into obligation, and obligation into a prison. Childhood, through the lens of emotional responsibility. Imagine being 7 or 12 or 16 and already feeling responsible for someone else's emotional state. It's like growing up inside a mirror where your reflection is always distorted by her pain. If she was crying, it was your fault. If she was tired, it was because of you. If she was disappointed, it meant you weren't enough. You learned to anticipate her moods, to adapt to her needs, to suppress anything that might upset her delicate balance. You became a child therapist, without training, without rest, without being asked. Just loved in ways that made you feel heavy. Why this is so hard to talk about, many people find this hard to name. Because society teaches us that a suffering mother is always a saint. That poor woman deserves our compassion, our patience, our silence. But what if that suffering was never healed and was instead weaponized? What if she never asked how you felt about it? What if your childhood was full of emotional blackmail disguised as bonding? What if the only way to be loved was to not need anything yourself? That is not love. That is survival in a relationship where love came wrapped in guilt, sorrow, and sacrifice. The cost of carrying her pain. You may be an adult now, with a job, a partner, maybe kids of your own. But that guilt, that hesitation to choose yourself, it lingers. You may still feel anxious when saying no, still feel guilty when setting a boundary, still find yourself over-functioning, over-giving, over-apologizing. Because somewhere deep inside, a younger version of you still whispers, "If I shine too much, Mom will break." And that belief is not your fault, but it is now your responsibility to heal. Virginia Satir's insight, Virginia Satir taught that no family dynamic is more powerful than the healing of the self. She believed that every human being has the right to exist without guilt, to feel their feelings, speak their truth, and honor their desires. In her work, she often addressed the subtle control patterns passed from parent to child and the invisible roles that children are forced to play. She would say, "We get caught in roles, not because we want them, but because someone else's survival depended on us playing them. And perhaps that's what you became, the emotional caretaker, the guilt-ridden protector, the child who thought love meant fixing someone else's pain." You are not wrong for wanting more. So let's return to the question we started with. Did you feel guilty just for wanting something your mother didn't want? If the answer is yes, then maybe your childhood was shaped by a silent agreement that her needs would always come first, and yours would wait forever. But you don't have to keep living like that. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are not cruel for protecting your peace. You are not disloyal for building a life that doesn't revolve around her pain. You are just finally breaking the cycle. And that is an act of love, not against her, but for you, because love should never make you feel like a traitor for simply being alive. The mother, always in pain. When suffering becomes power, not all power comes from strength. Sometimes power comes from weakness strategically displayed. When a mother is always sick, always exhausted, always mistreated or misunderstood, something dangerous can happen without anyone noticing. Her suffering becomes a form of control, not because she's evil, not because she plans it consciously, but because pain, in her world, has always been a way to get love, to get attention, to get others to stay. And when that pain becomes the center of the home, everything and everyone starts to orbit around it. The pain that organizes the family. Imagine a house where the emotional weather always depends on mom's condition. If she's in a good mood, the sun comes out. If she's having a bad day, everyone goes silent. If she's crying, the atmosphere turns gray. If she's not talking, the tension grows like thunder in the distance. In this house, no one asks how you are. The focus is always on how she is. And slowly, you learn a terrifying rule. Your emotions are less important than hers. You start watching her face before speaking. You hide your excitement because she's having a hard day. You cancel your plans because she doesn't feel well. You even feel guilty for smiling when she's frowning. It's not just about love anymore. It's about emotional management, and you're the one doing the managing. The role of the emotional thermostat, Virginia Satir, spoke often about family roles. In dysfunctional systems, people stop being themselves and become what the family needs them to be. You, the child of a mother who's always in pain, might have become the emotional thermostat. You regulate the emotional temperature of the house. You try to prevent explosions. You take on the job of cheering her up, calming her down, fixing what you never broke. You grow up hyper-aware. Your nervous system is trained to detect the slightest shift in mood. Your body is in constant alert, always asking, is she okay? Because if she's not okay, then no one is. And if she's not okay, you believe it's somehow your fault. The poor me mask and its hidden message. Let's look at the deeper emotional message behind this kind of mother. She might say things like, "Nobody loves me. I can't do anything right. I gave up everything for you. I'm tired of always being the strong one." Why? But here's what's really being communicated beneath those words. I need you to make me feel better. I need your loyalty. I need your emotional energy, even if it costs you your freedom. In these moments, her pain isn't just a symptom, it's a strategy. It's how she keeps you close, how she avoids being challenged, how she demands emotional care without ever asking directly. Because when someone is always the victim, it becomes impossible to confront them without looking cruel. You become afraid of your own needs. After years of this dynamic, something tragic happens. You start to fear your own desires. You want to leave town, but feel like you're abandoning her. You want to disagree, but feel like you're attacking her. You want to be happy, but feel like you're betraying her sadness. You don't even know what you want anymore, because your wants have always come second to her wounds. You internalize a dangerous belief: if I choose myself, I will hurt the person I love most. That belief is the root of a deep emotional wound, a wound that keeps you stuck in a life that feels like it's never really yours. When love feels like a duty, this is where the dynamic becomes particularly painful. You love your mother, that's not in question. But the love you've learned to give is heavy, loaded with unspoken responsibility. It feels more like a debt than a connection. You love her because you must. You show up because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. You stay silent not because you agree, but because speaking might make her cry. This isn't love flowing freely. It's love filtered through fear, guilt, and emotional blackmail. Virginia Satir warned, when love is given in exchange for silence or sacrifice, it stops being love and becomes control. The illness that never heals. Sometimes, this type of mother will have real health issues. Sometimes she won't, but her body will always be on the verge of something. She always needs rest, care, or sympathy. Doctors never find anything definitive, but she'll say things like, "The stress you give me is killing me. You don't know how much I suffer. My heart can't take it." You live in fear that something terrible will happen if you upset her. She has trained you to associate your boundaries with her health decline. It's emotional hostage-taking, wrapped in a mother's voice, and it leaves you drained, anxious, and afraid of yourself. The damage this dynamic causes. What does this do to a child? Long-term, you become overly responsible in all areas of life. You feel guilty for saying no, even when it's necessary. You attract relationships where you must save or fix others. You fear conflict like it's violence, because at home, it always was. You believe love requires pain. You may struggle with boundaries. You may people-please your way into burnout. You may feel like your emotions don't matter, because they never did. Worst of all, you may still feel like you don't have permission to live freely. It's not your fault, but it is your healing. This is not about blaming your mother. She may have been doing the best she could from her own unhealed wounds. But recognizing her behavior is not betrayal. It's the first step toward healing your inner child. Virginia Satir believed deeply in the power of personal freedom. She taught that families pass down patterns until someone is brave enough to break them. If you grew up carrying your mother's pain, you were never selfish. You were loyal. But now, it's time to be loyal to someone else, yourself. A new way forward. You don't have to keep shrinking. You don't have to keep saving her. You don't have to keep proving your love by sacrificing your life. You can love her and still set boundaries. You can care and still walk away from manipulation. You can forgive her and still choose your own happiness. Because love that costs your identity isn't love. It's bondage. And you were not born to be a lifeline. You were born to live fully, freely, and without guilt. The child who becomes the emotional caretaker. You didn't ask for this role. You didn't sign a contract. And yet, somewhere between your mother's pain and your silence, you became something a child should never have to be. The emotional caretaker. Not because you were stronger, not because you were more capable, but because her suffering left no room for your needs. In homes like these, the parent-child dynamic quietly reverses. The one who should protect becomes the one who demands protection, and the one who should be held starts doing the holding. The shift you never saw coming. It doesn't happen all at once. At first, you just want to help. You comfort her when she cries. You learn to listen when she vents. You offer hugs, encouraging words, and quiet support. But soon, your support becomes expected. She begins to confide in you, not in a healthy, age-appropriate way, but as if you were her friend, her partner, her therapist. She may tell you about her struggles with your father. She might talk about how no one understands her. She may say things like, "You're the only one I can talk to. You're my reason to keep going. Without you, I don't know what I'd do." Those words sound like love, but they are chains. Because they come with a message. You are responsible for my emotional survival, the loss of childhood. In this environment, being a child becomes a luxury you can't afford. You stop playing freely. You suppress your emotions to keep the peace. You feel ashamed when you want something for yourself. You grow up fast, not out of maturity, but out of necessity, because someone had to be the stable one, and she made it clear it had to be you. Virginia Satir spoke often about parentification when a child is forced to become what the parent should be. This isn't about a child doing chores or helping around the house. This is about carrying emotional weight that no child should ever bear. It's when you become the safe place, the comforter, the one who absorbs pain that doesn't belong to you. And the worst part? You thought this was love. Love that demands self-erasion. She didn't have to say it out loud. The message was always there. Don't upset me. Don't disappoint me. Don't grow in a direction I can't follow. So you learned to erase parts of yourself. You became the peacemaker, the perfect student, the reliable one, the one who never complained. Because in your mind, love meant one thing: take care of her, or she might fall apart. And that belief followed you into adulthood, like a shadow. The hidden damage. Being your mother's emotional caretaker didn't make you stronger. It made you smaller. You may struggle to name your feelings. You may panic when someone asks what you need. You may feel guilty for relaxing, resting, saying no, or simply asking for space. Because for years, your nervous system was trained to scan the room for someone else's pain and ignore your own. You might now feel anxious in relationships, over-responsible for other people's moods, emotionally drained without knowing why, uncomfortable with joy or attention. terrified of letting others down. These are not personality flaws. These are survival strategies you learned as a child in an emotionally reversed relationship. The trap of feeling special. Sometimes the caretaker child believes they are special. They are the chosen one, the one mom trusts, the one she opens up to, and that illusion of closeness can feel comforting, even sacred. But it's not closeness, it's enmeshment. Real closeness honors boundaries. What you had was a bond built on blurred lines, a connection that asked you to be less of yourself to keep the other person stable. Virginia Satir said, "We must not confuse love with role-playing. Being the one who holds it all together may have felt like love, but it cost you your authenticity. The adult who still overfunctions. Fast forward to adulthood, and the emotional caretaker still lives inside you. You might be the one in every group who has it all together. The friend who listens but never shares. The one at work who takes on too much and never asks for help. You're praised for being dependable, strong, wise, but inside you feel tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that comes from never being allowed to rest emotionally. Because when you've been trained to fix everything for others, you forget what it feels like to be held yourself. Breaking the cycle. Here's the hard truth. Being someone's emotional caretaker is not love, it's a role. And roles can be stepped out of. You don't owe your mother your emotional energy. You don't owe anyone the parts of yourself that you had to abandon to be accepted. You are allowed to be seen, to feel, to rest, to ask, to say no. You are allowed to stop performing. Virginia Satir believed that healing begins when we reclaim the right to exist without permission. You are not here to carry legacies of pain. You are not here to play therapist to the one who should have protected you. You are here to be whole. Reclaiming your inner child. Healing. This wound starts with reconnecting to the part of you that was never allowed to exist. The child who wanted, the child who played, the child who cried, the child who said, "But I don't want to," and was punished with guilt. That child is still inside you, waiting to be seen without being useful. You don't have to earn your right to be loved anymore. You don't have to perform care in order to receive care. You don't have to be the strong one. You can be soft, tired, messy, and still worthy. A final word. Let's be honest, this hurts. Because realizing that your childhood love was based on performance is devastating, but it's also liberating. Because once you see the role you were given, you can finally step out of it and say, "I'm not your emotional caretaker anymore. I'm your child, and I deserve to be." That shift doesn't mean you stop loving her. It just means you start loving yourself too. And that is where healing truly begins. The guilt of wanting something different. The weight of choosing yourself. Have you ever said no and immediately felt like a bad person? Have you ever wanted something different from your mother and felt guilty just for desiring it? If so, you know this kind of guilt. Not the kind that comes from doing something wrong, but the kind that comes from just being yourself. It's the guilt of a child who was taught, without words, that her needs were a threat, that joy could upset someone, that choosing a different path meant causing pain. This is the guilt that keeps you small. And it doesn't just live in your mind, it lives in your body. Where the guilt begins. Let's go back. You were just a child. Maybe you wanted to go play instead of staying home. Maybe you dreamed of living far away one day. Maybe you simply liked things she didn't understand. And instead of curiosity or encouragement, you received a subtle punishment, a sigh, a sad face, a quiet, "I guess you don't care about me," a tear falling right when you said what you wanted. No one yelled, no one punished you directly, but you learned something anyway. If I follow my desires, I hurt the person I love. So you began to fold. You began to choose what she wanted or nothing at all. You confused compliance with love, and your guilt grew roots. The message beneath the tears. When a mother plays the victim, always sad, always sick, always fragile, she doesn't need to scream to control. She just needs to make you feel like your freedom breaks her heart. And so you learn to carry her pain by shrinking yourself. Virginia Satir warned about this kind of emotional pattern. She said, "We learn to please others before we learn to be ourselves." When your mother defines love as sacrifice, you grow up believing that your truth is dangerous. The price of autonomy. Here's the paradox. The more you try to become yourself, the more guilty you feel. You go on a trip and wonder if she'll be okay. You start therapy and feel like you're betraying family loyalty. You express a boundary and hear her crying on the phone that night. You say you're tired, and she replies, "You don't know what tired is." Suddenly, your personal growth feels like a crime, and deep down, you carry the silent belief, "I don't get to choose my life if it makes her sad." That belief is not love. It's emotional bondage passed down as duty. When pleasing becomes survival. As a child, it wasn't just about keeping the peace. It was about survival, emotional survival. You learned that being good, pleasing, agreeable, and loyal kept the relationship intact. But the cost? Your authenticity. You started choosing safety over truth, approval over exploration, attachment over self-worth. You wore a mask for so long, now you're not even sure what your face looks like underneath. The split inside. You grew into two people. One part wants to grow, explore, speak, shine. The other part flinches every time you do. This inner split is painful and confusing because on the outside, you're fine, but inside, you feel trapped. Trapped between love and resentment, between duty and desire, between guilt and truth. Virginia Satir said, "Freedom is only possible when we are allowed to express who we really are." But how do you express who you are when that has always made someone else cry? The myth of selfishness. One of the most dangerous lies you were taught is this: wanting something different from your mother is selfish. But here's the truth. Wanting space is not betrayal. Wanting a voice is not cruelty. Wanting peace is not abandonment. Wanting your own life is not rejection. You have the right to want, even if it makes others uncomfortable. You have the right to change, grow, move, speak, and say no. That is not selfishness. That is healing. Breaking the emotional contract. At some point in your childhood, you signed an invisible contract. I will not choose myself if it risks hurting her. But that contract is killing your soul. It's why you feel anxious before family calls. It's why you explain yourself too much. It's why you say yes when everything inside screams no. Breaking that contract is not about revenge. It's not about turning cold. It's about choosing truth over illusion, love over fear, wholeness over guilt, giving yourself permission. You are allowed to want something different. You are allowed to be your own person. You are allowed to live without guilt. Your mother's emotions are not your responsibility. Her healing is not your job. Her disappointment is not proof that you've done something wrong. You can love her and still set boundaries. You can care and still walk away. You can speak up and still be a good daughter. You can choose yourself without being the villain in her story. Virginia Satir believed in the power of internal permission. She said that healing begins when we stop waiting for others to give us the right to exist. So here it is. You have permission. Closing. A new kind of loyalty. The highest form of loyalty is not self-sacrifice. It's honesty. When you live your truth, you become a mirror to those who've forgotten their own. You show others that it's okay to grow, to leave, to change, to heal. And sometimes that mirror will break them, but sometimes it will wake them up. You are not responsible for their reaction. You are only responsible for your soul. So the next time you feel guilt creeping in, remember, that guilt is not a sign that you're wrong. It's a sign that you're finally free. The trap of premature care. When you grew up too soon, you were just a child, but the moment your mother started leaning on you like you were her equal, or worse, her savior, you stopped being one. You became a caretaker long before your time, not because you were ready, but because no one else was holding her pain, so she handed it to you. This is the trap of premature care. You grow up in a home where someone is always falling apart, and you step in to keep everything from crumbling. You become the glue, but that glue starts to harden inside you. Childhood interrupted. A normal childhood is full of discovery, play, and wonder. But in your home, the tone was different. Maybe you remember listening to your mother's complaints about her life when you were still in pajamas, calming her down when she cried after fights, hiding your own feelings so she wouldn't get worse, canceling plans to stay by her side when she was not feeling well. You didn't do those things because you were mature. You did them because you thought you had no choice. Virginia Satir said, "A child should not have to parent the parent. That reversal stunts identity." And that's exactly what happened. Your growth paused, not on the outside, but on the inside. You became emotionally older than your age. You wore responsibility like armor. And every time you helped her, you lost a little more of yourself. The role that was never yours. No one said, "Here, Be your mother's emotional nurse. But the message was clear. She needs you. Don't upset her. You're her favorite. You're the strong one. You started reading moods like maps. You started fixing things that were never yours to fix. You started playing therapist before you even knew how to spell the word. The problem wasn't that you helped. The problem was that your help became your identity. And now, as an adult, you may still feel overwhelmed when others rely on you, responsible for people's emotions, afraid to say no in case someone falls apart, guilty for resting, emotionally exhausted all the time. That exhaustion has a name. It's called premature caregiving burnout, and it started long before you were ready. The invisible wound. Most people won't see this wound. They'll say you're strong, mature, always so composed. But inside, you know the truth. You're tired. You're overwhelmed. You never learned how to let go, because letting go wasn't safe. If you didn't hold everything together, who would? And so, you became hyper-responsible, mistaking anxiety for love and performance for connection. Virginia Satir warned about this. When we raise children to be responsible for other people's well-being, we rob them of their right to simply be. And that's what hurts the most. You were never allowed to just be. When responsibility becomes identity. What happens when your worth is tied to how well you care for others? You stop existing for yourself. You define your value by your usefulness. You learn to ignore your needs because others' needs always scream louder. And you carry this into adulthood. The friend who fixes everyone's problems, the partner who carries the emotional load, the employee who never says no, the sibling who's always checking in, the adult child who still feels like a bad person for taking space. You feel guilty for not being available. You apologize for resting. You panic when someone you love is upset, because somewhere deep down, a belief still echoes. If I'm not helping, I'm not lovable. The emotional price. Premature care is not free. It takes pieces of your inner child. It silences your joy. It delays your dreams. It teaches you that love is earned through labor, not presence. And it sets you up for one of life's cruelest traps, taking care of everyone, while secretly hoping someone will finally take care of you. But they won't. Not because you don't deserve it, but because you taught everyone that you don't need it. That's the legacy of being the strong one. It isolates you, and it leaves a question lingering in your soul. When is it my turn? Recognizing the trap. Maybe you're starting to realize the trap. That being her emotional caregiver was never your job. That you were just a child with your own fears, needs, and longings. But every time you cried, someone else's pain took priority. So you dried your tears, clenched your jaw, and got to work, emotionally. And now, even though your mother might not need you like before, the role is still alive inside you. It's time to question it. You are allowed to be taken care of. You don't have to earn love through exhaustion. You don't have to fix everyone to deserve rest. You don't have to be needed to be worthy. You are allowed to be the one who is held. You are allowed to be messy. You are allowed to say, I can't. You are allowed to step out of that old identity. Virginia Satir believed deeply in inner balance. When we heal the imbalance between giving and receiving, we create space for real connection. You can love others deeply without abandoning yourself, reparenting yourself. Healing this wound is about reparenting yourself. It means going back and giving that child, the one who had to grow up too soon, what she never received: emotional safety, freedom to play, space to be imperfect, permission to rest. You don't need to be strong every day. You don't need to carry others' chaos anymore. You can let go. You can step back. You can choose peace over performance. That doesn't make you selfish. It makes you free. Closing. You were always worthy, even without the role. The truth is this: you were worthy before you became the caretaker. You were enough before you earned anyone's praise. You were lovable before you ever fixed a single thing. You didn't fail her. She failed to protect the child in you. And now, your job is not to keep performing the same role. Your job is to heal, to rest, to rediscover the joy of simply existing. You don't have to save anyone anymore. You get to save yourself now. The phrases that poison, without yelling. Guilt, whispered softly. Not all wounds come from screaming. Some of the deepest ones come from whispers. Quiet words said with just enough sadness to make you feel responsible for someone else's pain. Your mother may have never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her power didn't come from volume. It came from guilt. And she delivered that guilt not with threats, but with phrases that sounded like love, yet left you drowning in confusion. Virginia Satir once said, "Communication is not just what we say, but how we say it." In the family, tone becomes legacy. And in your family, the tone was clear. You owe her, always. The language of emotional blackmail. Let's look at some of those familiar phrases. Maybe you've heard things like, after everything I've done for you, you'll understand when you're a mother. It must be nice to have your own life. I guess I'm just a burden now. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. Alone. I don't want to be a problem, but if something happens to me, just know I always loved you. On the surface, these words sound soft, even sad, but underneath, they carry a sharp edge. They say, you are the reason I suffer. You owe me your life. Your independence is abandonment. And those messages don't disappear. They settle in your chest and become a quiet inner voice that whispers, you're selfish, you're ungrateful, you don't love her enough. Why it hurts so much? This kind of guilt is hard to talk about because it's not overt abuse. No one hit you. No one screamed. So you think, I'm overreacting. But you're not. You were trained to feel responsible for someone else's emotions, and every time you asserted yourself, the price was her disappointment. You didn't grow up with violence. You grew up with emotional blackmail dressed as motherhood. That's why you still apologize too much. Feel nervous when saying no. Panic when someone seems upset. Over-explain yourself. Avoid confrontation at all costs, because deep down, you fear repeating that cycle, hurting someone just by being yourself. The guilt of normal desires. Wanting space? Guilt. Needing quiet? Guilt. Spending time with friends instead of calling her? Guilt. Celebrating a win when she's feeling down? Guilt. It was never about what you did. It was about how she made you feel afterward. She never said, you're a bad child, but she didn't have to. She just had to sound hurt, sad, disappointed. And that was enough. You learned to fear the emotional fallout of your own autonomy. You learned to keep your happiness small, just in case it made her feel worse. You learned that your peace might be the source of someone else's pain. And that belief is poison. Why this is so hard to heal. You love her. You know she's been through a lot. You know she didn't have the tools. You know she probably didn't mean harm, but intentions don't erase impact. Yes, she may have said those things because she was hurting. Yes, she may have wanted connection, not control. But the result was still the same. You became afraid of your own needs. Virginia Satir taught that the survival patterns of one generation often become the emotional prisons of the next. And that's what happened. Her pain became your guilt. Her sadness became your silence. Her vulnerability became your responsibility. The inner dialogue that lingers now, even as an adult, you might hear echoes of those phrases inside you. Maybe I'm being too much. I should be more grateful. I can't tell her this. It'll break her heart. She gave up so much. Who am I to say no? This is not your voice. It's hers, living inside you, and it will stay there until you decide to break the spell. Rewriting the script. You can begin by recognizing the manipulation, not to condemn her, but to free yourself. When she says, after everything I've done for you, you can say, you chose to give. That was your decision. I don't owe you my life. When she says, it must be nice to have freedom, you can say, it is, and I'm allowed to enjoy it. When she says, I'll just be alone then, you can say, you're not alone, but I can't be your emotional anchor anymore. You don't have to be cruel, but you can be clear. You can name the manipulation and still love the person. That's not betrayal, that's truth. Letting go of the need to prove your love. You've spent a lifetime trying to show her you love her, by being there when it hurt you, by sacrificing your time, your rest, your truth, by suppressing your joy to protect her sadness, by choosing her comfort over your own growth. But here's the truth. Love that needs to be proven over and over again is not love. It's emotional debt. You don't need to prove anything anymore. Your love is not measured by your exhaustion. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to step back without guilt. You are allowed to say, that's not my responsibility. Virginia Satir reminded us that growth begins when we stop confusing love with sacrifice. Closing. The whisper no longer controls you. Those phrases that once made you feel like a monster, they were never the truth. They were her pain, misplaced, misdirected, and poured into you. But now, you get to choose what you carry. You get to decide which voices you listen to. You get to rewrite the story. You are not a bad person for creating boundaries. You are not ungrateful for seeking joy. You are not selfish for wanting your own life. You are free to exist without guilt whispered in your ear. You don't have to respond to the sadness. You don't have to chase forgiveness. You don't have to play the same role in her script. You can walk off the stage and write your own. The identity that never fully develops, growing up without knowing who you are. There's a strange emptiness that follows children who grew up around emotional guilt, manipulation, or obligation. It doesn't always look like pain. Sometimes it looks like confusion. a sense that you're drifting, living on autopilot, making choices that don't feel fully yours, but not knowing what else you'd choose. That's what happens when your identity never had space to grow. When you spent your whole life adjusting to someone else's needs, moods, and expectations, you didn't develop a solid sense of self. You developed a skill, adapting. But adaptation is not identity. Who are you without the role? This question can feel terrifying. Who am I when I'm not the helper, the fixer, the good one, the loyal child? Maybe you've built a life that looks successful. Maybe you take care of everyone. Maybe you're always busy, always productive, always there for others. But when you pause, there's a silence inside. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that echoes. Because no one ever asked, "What do you want?" And if they did, you didn't know how to answer. You were too busy being what someone else needed you to be. Virginia Satir said, "A strong sense of self is the foundation of emotional freedom." But your sense of self was interrupted, not by violence, but by emotional obligation. The cost of a life spent. Adjusting you became good at fitting in. You read people's needs before they spoke. You learned what tone would make moms smile, what silence would avoid conflict. You became a master of becoming whoever the moment demanded. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being you. You might now feel lost when no one needs you, anxious when you have free time, disconnected from your dreams, uncertain about your opinions, guilty for wanting something more. That's not because you're broken. It's because you were trained to exist for others, not for yourself. The false self you built to survive. Psychologists call it the false self, a version of you created to survive a dysfunctional environment. You wore it like a mask, always smiling, always agreeable, always supportive, always available. Underneath, though, was the real you, unformed, unseen, unheard. Because if you had let that part speak, it might have said things your mother didn't want to hear. "I'm tired. I don't agree with you. I want something different. I don't want to carry this." And instead of love, you feared guilt, sadness, silence, rejection. So you chose survival over truth. But now, the mask is heavy, and it's starting to crack. Signs you never developed a solid identity. You're unsure of your likes and dislikes. You change your personality around different people. You second-guess your instincts. You rely on external validation. You feel fake, even when you're trying to be authentic. This is what happens when your childhood was about fitting in instead of being known. And yet, the real you is still there, waiting patiently beneath all the layers of who you had to become. Why it's not your fault. You didn't get to grow naturally. Your environment didn't allow it. Your emotional energy was spent managing someone else's reality. Your boundaries were blurred. Your desires were dismissed or redirected. Your emotions were filtered through her expectations. You never got to ask, "What do I love? What do I believe? What brings me joy?" Not her, not them, but me. Virginia Satir emphasized that identity is formed when a child feels safe to express their truth without fear. You didn't have that safety, but you can build it now. Rebuilding your identity as an adult. Here's what healing might look like. Saying, "I don't know what I want," and being okay with that. Trying new things, even if you're not good at them. Noticing your real emotions, not the ones you were taught to feel. Disappointing people, and surviving it. Making choices that others may not understand, but feel right to you. Rebuilding identity is not instant. It's slow, clumsy, vulnerable, but it's sacred because every small decision that comes from you, not your role, not your guilt, is an act of rebirth. You are more than who you had to be. Let's be clear. You were not born to be her caretaker. You were not born to mirror her needs. You were not born to be her emotional cushion. You were born to live a life that feels real, not rehearsed. It's okay to mourn the version of you that never had room to breathe. It's okay to feel anger at what was taken. It's okay to grieve, but it's also okay to start fresh, to say, "I don't want this anymore. I don't believe that. I feel something different. I want more." These are not betrayals. They are the sound of your identity returning, closing, the self you're still becoming. So many of your choices were shaped by fear, guilt, and the need to be good. But you are not a puppet. You are not a mirror. You are not a performance. You are a person, complex, evolving, whole. Virginia Satir believed that every person carries within them the seed of their true self, and that even when buried, it can be uncovered. That's your work now, not to punish your past, not to become someone entirely new, but to finally meet the person you were always meant to be. Not her daughter, not his rescuer, not their fixer, just you. Future relationships, when caring becomes an addiction. You were the caretaker, the emotional regulator, the one who swallowed your needs to keep others from falling apart. And now, as an adult, you find yourself in relationships that feel eerily familiar. You're the one who gives more, the one who stays longer than you should, the one who explains yourself over and over, the one who attracts partners, friends, or even coworkers who are broken, chaotic, or emotionally unavailable. Why? Because when you were taught that love means sacrifice, you start to seek that same dynamic over and over again. This is what happens when caring becomes an addiction. Love as rescue. You don't just want to be loved, you want to be needed. You fall for the person who just needs help. You stay with the friend who's always in crisis. You bend for the partner who can't do it without you. You give, fix, carry. Not because you have to, but because you don't know how not to. And in a twisted way, it feels good, useful, familiar, safe. But deep down, it's not love. It's the repetition of a role you learned in childhood. If I'm not saving them, I'm not worth loving. The fear of being unneeded. The idea of being in a relationship where no one needs you, it's terrifying. You fear being boring, replaceable, useless, unimportant. Because you've built your identity around being the strong one, the one who never complains, the one who always shows up. Virginia Satir taught that unhealed family roles often become the scripts for adult intimacy. You weren't given space to be cared for, so now you fear what happens if you stop caring for others. You confuse peace with emptiness. You confuse balance with boredom. You confuse love with emotional labor. You attract what you know. Unconsciously, you seek what's familiar, not what's healthy. That's why you might be drawn to emotionally unavailable people, chaotic personalities, partners with addictions, depression, or unresolved trauma. People who make you work for affection. Because your nervous system doesn't crave love. It craves the patterns it survived. And when someone comes along who's stable, kind, and emotionally available, you might find yourself pulling away. Not because they're wrong, but because they don't activate the old cycle of guilt, urgency, and rescue. You think, it can't be love if it's this easy. But maybe it's just finally safe. The burnout of overgiving. Being the caretaker in every relationship comes at a cost. You give and give until you feel empty. You say yes when you want to say no. You explain your boundaries like a lawyer preparing for trial. You feel guilty for resting. You feel exhausted all the time, not physically, but emotionally starved. And then comes the resentment, because no matter how much you give, no one gives back the way you hoped. But how could they? You never made space for it. You taught them that you don't need anything. And now you're drowning in silence, wishing someone would finally see you. The deepest longing. Here's the truth. You don't want to rescue people. You want to be seen, held, understood, chosen without conditions. But that part of you, the part that longs for real love, was buried under years of guilt, role-playing, and emotional responsibility. So now, when that longing rises, you push it back down with caretaking. Because caring for others is safer than asking to be cared for. Because needing feels dangerous. Because receiving feels selfish. Because you were taught that you are only lovable when you are useful. Breaking the cycle. You are not obligated to save anyone. Not your partner. Not your friend. Not your sibling. Not your mother. You are allowed to love without fixing. You are allowed to walk away from chaos. You are allowed to say, I am not responsible for your healing. Virginia Satir believed that true intimacy comes from authenticity, not performance. That means you get to be loved for who you are, not for what you do. You don't have to prove your worth through exhaustion. You are worthy now. Learning to receive. Healing this pattern starts with allowing yourself to receive. Let someone help you without apology. Let someone comfort you without deflection. Let yourself feel joy without guilt. Let yourself be supported without over-explaining. At first, it will feel wrong, awkward, exposed, even shameful, because your nervous system will scream, danger. You're not being useful, but keep going. Because this is how you teach your body and your heart that love doesn't require sacrifice. Choosing healthy love. Healthy love doesn't demand you shrink. It doesn't make you prove. It doesn't turn your kindness into currency. Healthy love says, you don't have to carry me. You can say no. You matter too. I see the real you, and I choose you. That's the love you've always deserved. Not because you earned it, but because you were always worthy of it. Closing. You are more than a caretaker. You were taught to believe that love means giving everything and asking for nothing. But that's not love. That's erasure. You are not just a helper. You are not just a fixer. You are not just a support system. You are a whole human being, with needs, with limits, with dreams. You don't have to care for everyone to matter. You don't have to break to be seen. You don't have to be needed to be loved. You get to choose peace. You get to choose balance. You get to choose yourself, because sometimes the most radical act of love is finally receiving what you never had the courage to ask for. The trap of the good child, the fear of disappointing. You were the good one, the responsible one, the quiet one, the helpful one, the child who didn't ask for much because asking felt like too much. But what if being the good child was never about who you truly were, but about what you had to become to keep love? Many people think the good child has it easier, that being praised, admired, and trusted is a blessing. But here's the truth. Being the good child is often a cage made of compliments, where love is only available when you follow the script, when obedience replaces connection. From an early age, you learn the rules. Don't upset her. Don't talk back. Don't be selfish. Be mature. Be helpful. Be quiet. And if you followed those rules, you got approval, maybe even affection. You were told you were so good, so mature, so easy to raise. But that praise came with a condition. Don't ever step out of line, because the moment you tried, the love changed. Suddenly, your mother was cold, disappointed, passive-aggressive, hurt. You weren't the good child anymore. You were the problem, the invisible contract. So you made an unconscious agreement. I will behave. I will please. I will not fail her, even if it costs me. And the cost? Your voice, your boundaries, your dreams, your identity. Virginia Satir said, "When a child must choose between loyalty and authenticity, loyalty usually wins, but it comes with a price, and that price is heavy. The terror of disappointing. As an adult, you carry a silent terror, the fear of being a disappointment. It shows up everywhere. You over-explain yourself. You apologize when you haven't done anything wrong. You feel anxious when someone is even slightly upset with you. You bend over backward to be liked. You can't say no without guilt. You fear failure like it's a threat to your existence. Because deep down, you were taught that love is conditional, that being accepted depends on being good. And you never want to feel that shift again. That moment when love becomes withdrawal, that emotional chill in the air, that disappointment in her eyes. So you keep performing, even when it's killing your spirit. The performance of perfection. Being the good child turns into a lifelong performance. You work hard, you're kind, you anticipate others' needs, you never cause trouble. On the outside, it looks like balance. But on the inside, there's exhaustion, there's loneliness, there's rage, the quiet kind, the kind that whispers, "Why does no one ever take care of me?" But you silence it, because rage doesn't fit the good child image. Sadness doesn't fit. Needs don't fit, so you smile, even when you want to scream. Why this role is so hard to break. The good child role is addictive because it gives you safety, a predictable way to avoid rejection, a shield against chaos, but it's also a trap. You don't know who you are outside of it. You fear that if you stop pleasing, people will leave. You fear that if you show your flaws, no one will stay. Virginia Satir believed that true healing begins when we disobey the rules that once kept us safe. That means risking disappointment to finally be real. What you missed while being good, in being the good child, you missed the freedom to explore, the safety to mess up, the right to say no, the space to cry loudly, the chance to be held when you weren't strong, the joy of being accepted in your full complexity. You became simple so you wouldn't be a problem, but you were never meant to be simple. You were meant to be whole. Healing, the courage to disappoint. This is the hardest part. You may have to disappoint her to heal. You may have to say no and live with her silence. You may have to choose yourself and feel the weight of her disapproval. You may have to step off the pedestal and risk not being the favorite. And you'll feel guilty. You'll feel wrong. But that's just the old script playing in your mind. Because choosing yourself was never wrong. It was just never allowed. Rewriting the role. You are not the good child. You are not the easy one. You are not the quiet fixer. You are a full human being with needs, edges, and contradictions. You get to say, "I'm tired of performing. I want to be seen, not admired. I'd rather be real than pleasing. I will not shrink to fit your image of me." Virginia Satir taught that freedom comes when we stop living for approval and start living in truth. Your truth matters. Your mess matters. Your voice matters. Even if it disappoints someone who once called you their perfect child. Closing. From obedience to authenticity. You were trained to fear disappointing others, but maybe it's time to disappoint the people who benefited from your silence. Not to hurt them, but to finally come home to yourself. You can still be kind, still be caring, still love deeply, but now you do it from a place of choice, not fear. You were never loved because you were good. You were loved because you were useful. That's not love, that's a transaction, and you don't owe anyone a performance ever again. The real you, the whole you, is ready, not to be good, but to be free. Emotional closing. When choosing yourself stops feeling like guilt and becomes true love. You've spent your whole life trying not to hurt her. You tiptoed, you pleased, you adjusted, you silenced yourself to protect her sadness. You became the good one, not because it was who you were, but because it was the safest place to exist. And now, as you look back, you see a pattern that was never about love, but about survival. You weren't loved for being yourself. You were loved for being useful, agreeable, obedient, emotionally available, even when it hurt. And now, the greatest act of love you can make is to finally love the person you abandoned, yourself. When self-protection is branded as betrayal. Choosing yourself was always framed as something wrong, a betrayal, a rejection, a selfish act. She may have never said it out loud, but her silence, her tears, her disappointment spoke clearly. When you prioritize yourself, you hurt me. So you internalized a lie. My joy is a weapon. My growth is disloyal. My boundaries are dangerous. Virginia Satir taught that we must unlearn the beliefs that once helped us survive and now keep us small. Because the truth is, choosing yourself is not betrayal, it's liberation. What loving yourself actually means. Loving yourself doesn't mean you stop loving her. It means you stop abandoning yourself in the process. It means saying no without explaining, resting without guilt, being honest, even if it disappoints, choosing relationships where love is mutual, not earned, letting go of roles that kept you from growing. It means realizing that your worth was never in what you did for others, but in who you've always been underneath the performance. Breaking the final spell, the guilt. Guilt will still come, because it's been there for years, because it's the echo of her voice inside you, because it sounds like you're being selfish, she needs you, you're overreacting, this is all in your head, but it's not. That guilt is not a sign that you're wrong. It's a sign that you're stepping outside the cage. You're challenging everything that once kept you safe and small. And guilt is just the smoke left behind when the old identity starts to burn. Let it burn, because what's waiting on the other side is not rebellion, it's authenticity. Letting the mask fall. You wore many masks, the perfect child, the helper, the silent supporter, the emotional sponge, the fixer, the rescuer, the one who never caused problems. Now, you get to take them off, one by one. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You don't have to be useful to be valued. You don't have to be quiet to be safe. You just have to be real. Virginia Satir said, "The greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to be who you truly are." And today, that gift is yours. A message to the child in you. To the child who held too much. You were never too much. You were never selfish. You were never the reason she was unhappy. You were never meant to be her caretaker. You were just a child with a big heart, a soft voice, and a need to be seen. You did your best. You survived. You protected her in ways no child should have to. And now, you get to stop. You get to be cared for. You get to be supported. You get to be whole. The child in you doesn't need to keep proving love. She just needs to be held by you. Rewriting the ending. You don't need her permission to heal. You don't need her approval to grow. You don't need her understanding to move on. This is your story now. You get to rewrite the ending. And maybe she'll never say sorry. Maybe she'll never understand. Maybe she'll call you cold. Maybe she'll play the victim again. But that no longer defines you, because now you see it clearly. Her pain was real, but it's not your responsibility anymore. Love doesn't mean self-erasure. Real. Love doesn't demand silence. It doesn't punish freedom. It doesn't create debt. It doesn't fear your truth. Real love says, you're allowed to grow. You don't have to fix me. You matter even when you say no. You can be different and still belong. You deserve that kind of love. You always did. And now you get to build it with yourself, with others, with life. Final words. You were never wrong. You were never wrong for wanting space. You were never wrong for dreaming bigger. You were never wrong for feeling suffocated. You were never wrong for needing more. What was wrong was a system that made you feel like love was something to earn. Virginia Satir believed that healing begins the moment you stop performing and start living. So here's your permission to feel deeply, to speak clearly, to set boundaries, to disappoint with grace, to rest, to receive, to exist, not for her, not for them, but for you. Because when choosing yourself stops feeling like guilt and starts feeling like love, you finally understand. You were never here to carry someone else's pain. You were here to become free, and now you are.